After the successful flight of Yuri Gagarin on the 12th of April 1961, success by the Soviets, in this Cold War climate between the United States and the Soviet Union, obviously the Americans had to react, and there was a decision taken rather rapidly after the successful flight of Gagarin for the Americans to go to the moon. And there was a talk by President Kennedy at the joint session of Congress on the 25th of May 1961, which means only a short time after the flight of Gagarin, the decision to go to the moon. There was, of course, consultation with the experts of space travel in the United States and the industry, and it was realized that it was something that was possible, that was going to cost a lot of money, but was possible. And the decision was made. There was some time that happened between this decision at the political level until there was a public announcement of this decision to go to the moon. And we had at Rice University, a rather well-known university in Houston, in September 1962, the famous words of President Kennedy: "We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and to do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one that we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win, and the others too." And these were very strong words, and there's no doubt that the enormous will that there was for Americans to be successful in this next step of space exploration and to beat the Soviet Union in that respect, and also the fact that it was so hard, had as a consequence to really focus the energies and talents available in the US to lead to a successful achievement of this program. This is a picture illustrating the hardware used by the US for human space flights and eventually leading to the Apollo program. First of all, you have the Mercury capsule here that was used for the very first space flight of an American, Shepard, in May 1961, so a few weeks only after the flight of Gagarin, but only achieving suborbital condition with the Redstone rockets. Later, the same capsule was used by John Glenn to achieve orbit on top of the Atlas rocket, which you see here, which had the capability to reach the orbital stage, not only suborbital like was the case for the Redstone rockets. This is Atlas. And after the decision of developing the hardware and also all the equipment needed for the moon program, the Americans developed the so-called Gemini program, respectively the Gemini capsule, which you see here. For 2 crew members on top of a more powerful rocket than Atlas, which was the Titan rocket. And the purpose of the Gemini program was to develop, from a hardware point of view and also operational point of view, some of the capabilities needed for the Apollo program, which were spacewalking on one hand and rendezvous in space. On top, you have the hardware that was specifically used for the Apollo program, for the moon program. You have the command module, the service module of the Apollo capsule, and here you have the lunar module, which is the part that was going to land on the moon. And the complex of command module, service module, lunar module was put on top of the Saturn V rocket, which was developed specifically for the moon program. Very large and very powerful rocket, Saturn V, which was in fact a baby of von Braun. Quite a remarkable achievement, and also the most challenging part of the Apollo program, the development and operation of the Saturn V rocket. Now on this picture you have the whole scenario of an Apollo mission. It was the same scenario that was used from Apollo 11, the first landing on the moon in the summer of 1969 until Apollo 17, the last one in December 1972. You basically had a launch from Kennedy Space Center, Florida. You had initially an Earth parking orbit. Of the Apollo spacecraft, which meant command module, service module, the lunar module, and also the upper stage of the rocket that was used in order to perform the so-called translunar injection, the TLI, at some point on this parking orbit in order to inject the complex on a trajectory toward the moon. There was a separation of the upper stage of the Saturn V rocket, which eventually went into a solar orbit. It was not used anymore after this delta V, or this maneuver, was performed. Then you have the spacecraft made of the command service module and the lunar module in the direction of the moon. And initially, when the launch took place, the moon was there. And the idea was to come in the leading edge of the motion of the moon. Because of the gravitational attraction of the moon, you had a curvature of the trajectory, and there was a maneuver that was necessary, which was basically a braking maneuver in order to insert the complex service module, command module, lunar module on lunar orbit, elliptical lunar orbit, which eventually was circularized, as you see here. Then the whole operation of separation of the lunar module after 2 crew members went into it, braking maneuver, landing on the moon, surface operation on the moon by 2 crew members, then liftoff from the moon surface of the upper stage of the lunar module, rendezvous with the command and service module where 1 crew member had been left. And then there was a jettison of the lunar module, which was no longer needed, and crashed on the surface of the moon. And at some point, trans-Earth injection with only command and service module, 3 crew members. And you see here this trajectory back towards the Earth. Command module, service module separation was taking place here. Then we had the entry and the landing in the Pacific Ocean of the command module only and 3 crew members on board. Well, here we see a beautiful picture taken on several of the Apollo missions, starting with Apollo 8, which in December 1968 already, a few months before the first landing on the moon, went all the way to the moon, on orbit around the moon. Then we had Apollo 10 a few months later, which was a rehearsal of the landing on the moon, but without the landing itself on the moon. And then everything was ready for the first landing in the summer of 1969, Apollo 11. Here we have the 3 crew members that were selected for the first landing on the moon. Neil Armstrong on the left-hand side was the commander of the mission. We had Buzz Aldrin on the right-hand side. It was a pilot of the lunar module. In the middle, you have Mike Collins, who was going to be, and who eventually was, the crew member that was going to stay on orbit around the moon in the command and service module. Okay, I'm going to show you now a short video clip of the landing of Eagle, the lunar module, with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on board, from some time after the separation from the command and service module, where Mike Collins stayed during the surface operation of the moon of his 2 colleagues. And you'll see the descent of the lunar module toward the surface of the moon, then the slow transition from orbital motion to a powered descent of the first surface of the moon. You'll see at some point a roll maneuver that was necessary because of the pitch down of the lunar module in order to be ready for being in a proper attitude or orientation for touching the surface of the moon. Then you'll see the final approach seen from the windows of the lunar module, with obviously Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin looking carefully at possible obstacles on the path. In fact, they had to avoid a crater and land on a relatively smooth region of the Sea of Tranquility. At some point, you'll hear 60 seconds, and that's a call from the ground team, which means they only had 1 minute of fuel remaining in their powered descent to the surface of the moon. At some point, you hear 30 seconds only. They have half a minute remaining. Shortly afterward, you see the shadow of the probe the contact of which with the surface of the moon was commanding a shutdown of the engine. Then you have the landing, and you have the famous words of Neil Armstrong, which you will hear, and then the reaction of the personnel in the control room in Houston. That's a very special and very emotional video, and it's a great moment of the history of human spaceflight.
Eagle Houston, we rig you now. You're a go for PDI, over. Roger, understand. At the Earth, right out our front window.
"50,000 feet above the moon, Eagle's descent engine ignited and began the deceleration for landing. As they descended, Armstrong and Aldrin watched the craters and mountains of the moon pass beneath them.
You're a go for landing, over. Roger, understand. Go for landing.
At this point, the Eagle rolled onto its back to give the landing radar surface acquisition. Now the crew was flying blind, hurtling toward the lunar surface. Only their instruments and the voice of mission control telling them where they were, until the slow pitch maneuver brought the lunar horizon to their view.
100 feet, 3.5 down, 9 forward. 5%. 185. 75 feet. There's looking good, down a half. 6 forward. 60 seconds. Lights on. 6. Down 2.5. Forward. Forward. Good. 40 feet, down 2.5. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward. Drift into the right a little. 20, down a half. 30 seconds forward. Just picking up some dust. Got the shadow out there. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Here you see the landing module Eagle after its landing on the surface of the moon. You see the lower stage, including the rocket motor that was used once again to transform the orbital motion close to the moon to a powered descent. And this is the so-called upper stage of the lunar module that was used to lift off from the surface of the moon with 2 crew members on board and perform a rendezvous with the command and service module on lunar orbit. A nice picture of Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon, picture taken by Neil Armstrong. This is a mythical picture and a very strong expression of this wonderful achievement of the Apollo program, the Apollo 11 mission in particular. From mission Apollo 15 on, of course, we had Apollo 11, which we talked about, 12, which was successful, 13, which, because of the huge problem we had on the way to the moon with the explosion of the oxygen tank, could not reach the surface of the moon, but the crew was saved, in great part because of the huge support that was brought by Mission Control Center under the leadership of Gene Kranz, the flight director of Apollo 13. Then we had 14, 15, 16, and 17, the last one. And for the last 3, the Americans used a lunar rover, electrically powered lunar rover, which you see here, that was allowing to explore a larger area around the landing point of the lunar module. Apollo 17, for the first time we had a scientist, a geologist on board the Apollo service module or lunar module. You see here Harrison Schmitt, the geologist who really would like to bring back that sample of the moon to the Earth, but it's a little bit too big, so he had to use a little hammer and take a little piece of this large rock to be brought back to the Earth. Now, of course, there was a political impact of the Apollo program, which is huge. The Americans had successfully accomplished the next step in human space exploration after the flight of Gagarin. They went to the moon and back. That was Apollo 11. But after Apollo 11, we had all the other missions that were used in order to explore other regions of the surface of the moon and bring back a lot of samples. So we learned a lot about the moon, about the history of the moon, about the geological and chemical composition of the moon. And there was a lot of science and technology that was benefited from the Apollo program. The Soviets had quite an active and successful lunar program, but it was automatic and robotic or remotely controlled lunar program. In fact, they started early, already in 1959, or 2 years after the launch of Sputnik 1 and Sputnik 2. They had the first successful picture taken of the far side of the moon with the Luna 3. And the lunar program, and again all automatic or remotely controlled, extended all the way to 1976. There was a total of 24 missions. Not all of them were successful, but some of them were, and some of them were even remarkably successful. The Soviets operated Lunar Code, which was a lunar rover, which was commanded to move on the surface of the moon and take detailed pictures of the landscape, and also get some information about the environment of the moon. And in the lunar program, we also had 3 sample return mission, automatic sample return mission, which in itself was quite a remarkable achievement. So the whole lunar program, LUNA, lunar program of the Soviets, was quite a successful program. They tried also to beat the Americans with a manned mission in the 60s to the moon. And this is the N1 rocket that they tried to develop in order to achieve that goal. Unfortunately, they were not successful. The N1 rocket had a lot of technical problems, and finally they had to abandon this idea of beating the Americans on the surface of the moon with manned means.